All right, I'm going to be spending a little bit of time going over how to use Google Sheets because I've realized a lot of people are struggling with it. So I want to start out with a brand new sheet and take a look at basically how to input information. So I want you to be thinking independent, dependent variables as well as types of groups. So I'm going to put some data in and this is pretty straightforward. You just go ahead and enter in the raw data first. You can see I've put in some data from two different experiments. On the left, some kind of time versus distance. On the right, some kind of group A versus group B. So on the left, time is going to be the independent variable. Distance is the dependent. I don't really know what the experiment is per se, but notice that we have the time in seconds, the distance here. With that, what we're going to be able to do is now create a graph where we have two continuous variables, therefore we're thinking more of a scatter plot. So we're going to want to click on the data, highlight it, select it, okay, come up to data, just kidding, insert chart. Now, right off the bat, there we go. Let me go ahead and kind of squeeze this in so you can see everything on your screen. Okay. So we don't really want a column chart because the column would indicate that 0 and 30 and 60 and 90 are all separate groups. So we're going to want to go with either a line graph or a scatter plot. In this case, let's go ahead and go with line graph, okay? So simple enough. If you want to be able to now edit each of these axes, if you're not happy with how they look, you can come over here, just click it. Data is going to tell you just the general information, but the customization chart is where you're going to really get in there and fix it up to how you want it. So type right here, there's a drop down menu. We can change the chart title to be something like how time affects the distance traveled of a Poopy Dukes on a whatchamacallit, whatever. It doesn't really matter what we call it, but we can go ahead and just change that. Then once we come back into the drop-down menu, we can add a subtitle. That's just going to give it a little bit more reinforcement. I'd encourage you to try to use these sometimes, especially if your title is particularly lengthy or the description is pretty long. Horizontal title axis. Now, notice here, oops, that it already says time in seconds, and that's because when I highlighted my data, I included the headers, the time and the distance, so those are already there. But if you want to modify anything, you can. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and delete this and talk a little bit more about the ones that you've been seeing more of, which would be categorical data. Now, I've seen a lot of groups, a lot of students put it in the Excel spreadsheet, something along these lines. And for starters, don't include trial. That it doesn't matter if you did trial 1 first or if you did it at the end, right? It doesn't change your data, so it's a completely arbitrary title. There's no need to put it there. So go ahead and get rid of those trials. What you're interested in now, notice that in our two continuous variables, 0 corresponds to 0, 30 corresponds to 12, 60 corresponds to 24. But there's no correspondence between these here in our categorical data. So what we're going to go ahead and do is find those statistical categories. I'm sorry if you can hear my kids yelling in the background. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and get some general statistics done. So we're going to want to know things like the average. Is category A or category B higher? You can look at it, you can tell pretty easily, but still worth doing. We'll want to know the standard deviation. We're going to want to know the 95% confidence interval. And because we're comparing two groups, we can also go ahead and do a t-test to find the p-value. Notice if you were to have like a group C chilling over here, then your p-value would have to be compared between A to B, A to C, and B to C. So what I generally recommend is whatever one control you have, like one control group, you compare all categories to it, or you just compare the highest and the lowest, but we're not going to do group C, so let's go ahead and graph the average. Okay, so just a reminder of what our formula is here. Equal sign is going to open up the formula editor. In this case, we're going to do an average because it's an average, and it automatically recommends what I'm going to be typing in, but I still want to go ahead and do that just because I think it's better practice to put that in there. So average, open up parentheses, highlight your data, and parentheses, and hit equals, or return. Same for the standard deviation, equals STDEV. And I'm going to want to record to highlight exactly the same data that I did with my average. Notice right here, it's really tempting when you click on standard deviation to include your average. That does not get calculated into your standard deviation, just your raw data does. And there we go. Now, a lot of students have been asking, how do you find the 95% confidence interval or the standard error or the mean? And on Excel, there's not like a really easy way to do it, but I still find it easier to use the formula bar than to find each one by hand. So what I'm going to do is equal sign again. Now we're in the formula editor. 2, remember our formula here is 2 times the standard deviation divided by the square root of n. You'd find that on your formula sheet. I don't expect you to remember it, but just kind of a quick refresher there. So what I'm going to be doing is taking 2, multiply that by the standard deviation, and then dividing by the square root. My n number in this case, what do I have? I think 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So square root of 6 and hit enter. The reason I want to do that is, let's say I had grouped like A to Z, it would be a crap ton more easy to just like go ahead and slide this over. So I didn't really explain when I did that, so let's go through and delete these guys. Okay, so I've got my formula in for the average, for the standard deviation, and for the 95% confidence interval. If I highlight these guys, and assuming that my data for group A is right above it, and then what I'm looking for is group B, which is right next to it, I can go ahead and like slide that over. Bada bing, it's done. Now when I go to find my t-test, I can equal sign t-test, nothing very surprising there. Highlight data set 1, pop in a comma. That's going to separate your data set 1 from 2, which you want to do. Select data set 2. We're going to do that 2, comma 2, which is just telling it that the first 2 you don't need to worry about. It just means 2 tails. Ooh, fancy. The second one means that it is unpaired data. So this 17 doesn't correspond to this 22. It's not like we took one individual before and after. It's just 2 arbitrary trials, right? Okay, and that parentheses to close out the formula. So we've got data set 1, data set 2, 2 comma 2, hit enter, and that's going to give you your p-value. Okay, so the question has come up a number of times, like, how do I graph my p-value? Well, you don't. What you're going to want to graph is really just these 2 values right here, right? So if you go in and you highlight this data and then you insert your chart just like we did a minute ago here, look at this. I have no idea what this is telling you. There's no reason that 17 and 22 are next to each other. There's no reason that 14 and 21 are next to each other. It was just based on the order that you took these data in. And so this chart, while it makes you feel like, oh yay, look how much information I have, it doesn't tell you anything. You can't look at it and quickly make some kind of conclusion. So it's crap. Go ahead and get that gone. What we do want to include are either group A and group B, so that's going to give us our labels along with the average. Okay, but it's not right next to it, so I don't know what to do. I got your back, kid. Listen. Here's what you're going to do. Highlight group A and group B, hold down on your laptop the command key, and then go ahead and highlight the averages. Then, if you go in, insert, chart, well, that's slightly surprising. Okay, let's figure out what's going on here. You know what? No, let's go ahead and delete this altogether. And just highlight this, because sometimes Excel is like, haha, just kidding, I know you're making a screencast, I'm going to screw with your emotions. Okay, so just highlight the averages, insert the chart. Okay, so what I have here is a chart that is ridiculously poorly scaled. It goes from 16 to 24. My X bar for group A is 16, so it doesn't even show up right here. So I'm just going to want to go ahead and click on the y-axis, come over to the side, and it'll automatically be in the customize folder, right? If it does open up in data, just hit customize. We're going to go to the vertical axis because that's the up and downy axis, also called the Y, and change your minimum value to something a little more reasonable, perhaps. And in this case, we do want to start at 0. We want to, sure, go up to 25. I'm kosher with that. Okay. So far, so good. So what we've got now is our data. And what this clearly shows is that the red one is higher than the blue one. Shocking, right? You could have seen that just from looking at the data. The next thing that we're going to want to do is go ahead and get error bars. And this is what I told you, like, this isn't possible. I lied. I'm sorry. Thank you, Katie, for showing me how to accurately do it. I'm super excited. So you click on the particular bar that you're looking at. In this case, I'm looking at group A, which had the mean of 16. So I'm going to go ahead and click on it. Go over to customize, just like we did before. If you're already on data, click customize. And when it says series, that's referring to the particular amount of data that you're looking at. And I'm just applying this to column 1. I don't want to go to all series because my 95% confidence interval for column 1 and column 2 are different. I'm just going to skinny this out a little bit here. Okay, so I click on it for this. I have column 1 highlighted. I'm going to include an error bar. I'm going to go to a constant value. I don't want a constant value of 10 because that's not what my 95% confidence interval is. Pop in that 1.2129. I can't read. Clearly, I don't want in the thousands. I need a decimal in there. And voila, you'll notice here I've got an error bar on just group A and not group B. I'm going to repeat the same process then. Select error bar, go to constant, go ahead, type in the value for your 95% confidence interval. Let's call this 50. Okay, again, need a decimal. And voila. Okay. So a couple of things that people have been asking me about. First of all, you don't need to do 95% confidence interval for your standard or for your error bars. You can do standard error. You can do standard deviation. You can do whatever your heart desires, but include a key somewhere, preferably right below the table, that says what you're doing, because otherwise, I have no idea what these error bars represent. So just a wee little note down here at the bottom is going to help clarify tremendously. The next thing, now that you actually have your data in place, the next thing you're going to want to do is be able to actually label your vertical and horizontal axes as well as give it a title. Notice that it was a whole lot easier when I had my first data set over here. It kind of automatically does it for you, but in this case what we're going to be doing is clicking on an axis and hit chart and axis title. We have all those same options. In this case, we're going to go with the chart title, horizontal and vertical axis, and I'm going to go ahead and get those labeled in there for you. You can see I've given this title and the axes very clear, descriptive things. Not quite, but that's okay. You get the idea. Notice I do have a unit right here. For the group, here's what really annoys me, and I haven't figured out how to fix this, is that we've got this beautiful key right here, but it doesn't actually tell you what blue versus red is. In this case, my group A and group B. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and take this guy, Command C, pop it into a new document up here. Okay, Control V. Link it to spreadsheet so that whatever changes you make in the spreadsheet will automatically be shown here. So for example, if I come back to my spreadsheet, let's say I go ahead and change this to 80. Okay, that's not an 80, 80, right? My data changes dramatically. And if I come over here, well, that didn't work. Whatever. Anyway, you do the same process again. So what we're going to do is just be able to add in a text box and edit it after your graph is already made. Okay, so we come up to Insert, Drawing, Text Box, and I can write Group A, Group B, save and close. Cool. I can try that whole thing again because it replaced my table or my chart. Okay, Drawing. Save and close. And then I can go ahead and just move this to exactly where I want it. I can wrap it. And there we go. Be able to put it really exactly where I want, so long as break text is selected for both your text box as well as your graph. So when I go to, oh, look, I can update it. See, it does change. I wasn't lying. Hit File, and save it as a PDF, and you're good to go.